Hey everybody, welcome back to the Jubilee, Freedom, and Shalom podcast. I'm here with my buddy Nate Hale as usual. If you can see him. Oh, there he is. You can hear him too.
We're going to try to record this to put on YouTube as well.
Yeah, so definitely.
Maybe we do something a little bit like we would try a new thing every 10 episodes or so to really up our game.
Trying to.
So,
we're back. It's been a while since we dropped an episode. Also, why is that the lingo? Doesn't matter. Like
drop it.
Bam.
Yep.
It's been a little while, and there's a couple reasons for that. Nate has been moving. He is now living up by the church that he works at, his family that he works with, Madison Church of Christ. He works or lives on the parking lot basically now. So he's been coordinating all that, trying to figure that out. He did all the renovations himself, he and his wife, and it was a lot of work. And so he's been stressing over that. And but it's done. They've been living there for almost 2 weeks now. Or is it almost 3?
I think it's come up on 3. And my dad also had a heart procedure, so we had to move home and kind of take care of my mom. This is just about me thing, but just coming, it's relevant because it probably factors into half the things I say. But my mom's had MS since I was like in 7th grade, which has slowly taken her ability to walk and to talk and to take care of herself. And so anyways, my dad had to have a stent put in because he had like 100% blockages in his heart. He had a quadruple bypass surgery back in 2011. And so we were called in to take care of mom. My mom almost died. I guess it's coming up on 2 years now where she dropped dead, had to restart her heart. Yeah, they had to restart her heart 6 times, I think. And when we got to the ER, they're telling us, just go ahead and squeeze her hand, tell you love her, and this is probably it, And so somehow it went from that to, okay, she might survive, but she'll be a vegetable, to like she's telling, stories from college. So, but she still, like, she can only use one of her hands because the other one's drawn up and a bunch of other stuff. So if you ever hear, I'll probably tell more about my mom and dad and, how my health and their health has affected my trajectory in life. But yeah, man, it's been a little crazy lately. And then we actually did squeeze in this episode.
Yeah, that's what I was
but
my
mic had a like 30 minutes in, like we're like halfway through the episode, it started to buzz for some reason. It was just so bad.
You know what it sounded like?
Episode, so
it sounded like we were listening to you talking, and we recorded you talking through a radio, and then
with a speaker,
and then recorded the recording of you talking through the radio.
Yeah, it was all buzzy and bad. And, yeah, exactly. So that was our
Emily
first,
and I went on vacation
on the podcast front.
Oh yeah, that's a big
rest in peace.
Yeah, took an L there. And then Emily and I went out of town. So I was trying to edit that episode together. Like, we flew out. We had to leave the house at like 3 or 4 in the morning. The next morning, and I was trying to edit the podcast episode together before I left, and then I got like 30 minutes in just doing my like spot checking, and I was like, what is this? So then it was like, well, now we're stuck for a week.
So we're going to try to re-record this podcast, even though like the information's not as fresh in our mind as it was when we did it the first time around. But it may be shorter and more concise because we've already had the conversation once, and we realized what's not interesting to us the second time around probably wasn't interesting to you the first time around. So
maybe we should do this more often.
We should always cut the first one.
And always record twice, maybe 3 times.
Maybe that would help everybody. So what we were talking about last time was a concept called Dexter, where they use... This
is in our last episode that actually did work.
That did work. And we wanted to kind of jump off of that idea of Dexter as it applies to school and the way we educate young people does the goodness that we hear and see in that apply to churches or not? And so that's kind of
Do you want to give just like as fast as you can a recap of what Dexter is?
Right.
Like the just make the connection for us.
Right. So there is a whole conversation about this that we suggested you listen to
Episode
from
11.
a YouTube video. It's from Zach and Jesse at Now You Know, and it was about Dexter. Okay, so you'll get there if you look those terms up. And basically, CEO of the company is not an educator; he's actually an engineer, I think. And we've talked about first principle thinking before. But what are we really, really trying to accomplish? Let's get down to the bottom of it. And so they're looking at education like, okay, if teachers are stressed, parents are stressed, kids are always stressed, like, is this really like what it should be? And so they have taken the role of teacher, which a lot of us would say is like, damn, they have to do so much from curriculum to teaching the curriculum and lecturing to getting beside you, at your desk, like mentoring you and saying, are you understanding, to making tests, to giving tests, to grading tests, and then
Communicating
trying
with
to get back to you
parents.
on, dealing with parents and discipline issues and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot going on in one role there. And so a lot of people, say like teachers don't get paid enough and all this, we've all
Yeah.
heard
Yeah.
certain things about that. And so what Dexter does is kind of break those into pieces where there is like a world-class, I know this subject really, really well. So they do the lecture. I think it's not just pre-recorded and you listen to it. I think it's still like a
Yeah, it's
live
live
stream where you
stream.
can
Yeah.
ask questions. Someone is curating those questions and giving it to the speakers so they're responding. Kind of a live stream style thing. And then it goes off to, there's teachers in the sense of the mentors that get beside you at the desk, ask you, did you understand that? Are you catching it? Is it Swiss cheese or is it solid? And then same thing with their grading and other systems where they have people that are just graders and they can actually respond to, why did I mark this wrong? Let you try
Give
it
a lot of
again.
feedback.
A lot of feedback. And it's not just like, you missed it, let's move on. It's like, why'd you miss it? Let's fill in the gaps.
How can you catch up? Yeah.
Yeah. So then I guess the last thing is they have in person and online, and you can kind of go back and forth with how often you want to be in, how often you want to be at home.
Yeah.
And their on-campus locations, to me, seem a lot like maker spaces, if you guys know what that is. But it's basically like, there's 3D printers, there's kind of high-end tech
Creation
tools
tech.
creation tools and learning tools that maybe not everyone could afford on their own, but they all have those resources at their on campus. So that's kind of Dexter in a nutshell. And so what we want to do is jump into, I'll let Daniel take it from here, but does that apply to church? Because we are also educating young people, trying to grow them up spiritually and physically, financially, maturity wise, and want them to be successful in life. Maybe not as the world defines success, but want them to be successful and it to go well with them. I think is the way the Bible puts it.
Yeah.
That life would go well with them and they would live long upon the earth. And so what do you think? Should we have one preacher for all of America? Let's take it to the extreme and talk about it and see if it still holds
Billy
up.
Graham for everybody.
Everybody. So what would be the pros and cons of taking that model of the let's say that the pastor, the local pastor he's preaching, he's visiting the hospital, he's trying to
so much.
Do funerals, weddings, counseling for those, with relationship problems or, life problems. Just trying to keep the wheels on the bus, and get everyone to where they need to be.
Yeah.
Maybe my preacher growing up was a camp director in the summer where he had 100 plus, campers for a week and planning all that. So there's a lot. I think pastors and teachers in the same way have a lot that's rolled up into one title.
A lot of expectations
So would breaking that apart be a good thing?
Before I answer that, there's a few things that I thought of while you were talking. First thing was this is important to affirm about Dexter, that if you go watch the YouTube video, which we'll put in the show notes, Michael is the guy's name, I think. that's the CEO, that he tries to affirm, that I would want to affirm before we even start this conversation about ministers, is that it's not the teacher's fault that they might be doing some of the parts of the teaching role poorly. They have been asked, too much is being asked of them. So in the same way, to make the connection to ministers, my granddad was a small church. He was a missionary for a long time. He and my grandma lived in Italy. My dad was born in Italy. They were missionaries there for a long time, came back, were ministers in Indiana, and then moved back to Italy after a while, and then have been back since. And he's been a preacher at many churches where preacher equals everything. And, you got to volunteer to lead singing. And my grandma would do the children's stuff. And she's really, really good at it. It would be very helpful in that. But then my granddad he was everything else. It was weddings, funerals, counseling, preaching, Sunday night class teaching, Wednesday night class teaching, a couple Bible studies during the week, having people over at his home, going to visit people. All of that was wrapped up in his role. And so what we're saying is not necessarily, it's not that ministers aren't good at doing all of that. Like I think my granddad was good at managing all of that. But if we could say, hey, what if we took one or two of those things that to you aren't as enjoyable and we gave them to somebody else? We're not saying that he's not good at them. What we're affirming is you're really, really good at these things, and we need you to just do those things really, really well. And so we want to give you the opportunity to do that. So that's the first thing. Second, our church, Providence Road, we've it was before which I've been here for a year, which is crazy. But before we started at Providence Road, they implement is not the right word. I don't know. Started tracking with this discipleship pathway idea. And that just like someone grows from an infant to a grandparent, that along the spiritual journey, you grow from infant, when you're baptized, to grandparent, where you're a disciple who is making disciple makers. Is kind of, that's like once you're at a point where you're discipling disciple makers, it's not like you've reached the end and there's no farther to go, but you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I thought of that because I was thinking some people might look at a church and they're like, yeah, Dexter, that makes sense for education for like kids and K through 12, that makes sense. Like do stuff with their learning and all that, but we're adults. So this is a different situation. And what I would say is it's not actually, because we have 50-year-olds in our congregation who are 2 years old spiritually. And we have 30-year-olds who are grandparents. And so, or spiritual grandparents, not physical grandparents. That would be crazy. Yeah, they're spiritual grandparents. And so
trips around the sun don't equal maturity.
Exactly. And so we have people that you would expect. They've been following Jesus for 20 years, but they spiritually are much younger than that. And so the idea of Dexter moving students by stage, not age, is the same idea that carries over to discipleship.
And what I think is harder for us as a church is how to identify the stage that they are in. Some of us feel like we can do that. We do feel like we can know when someone is that way. But here's the issue. Okay, so for instance, my wife tells a story about when she was a softball player or a basketball player. I can't remember which. But the coach wasn't playing her as much as some of the underclassmen, which could come across like, hey, man, like you're playing favorites, da-da-da-da. But one thing I appreciate this coach said, if you're able to, let's use basketball. It's a little easier for the analogy. But if you're able to hit 30 contested shots from the three-point line in practice, like I'll start playing you more.
Yeah.
Or if you can do these ball handling drills, I'll start playing you more. Like where there's an actual thing to aim for, and you know that if I get to this point, there's a fair, I'm to that next thing. and there's a goal out in front of you. It's not this kind of like mushy, slippery, the goalpost
I'll
keeps
just
moving.
do it whenever. Yeah, I'll play you whenever I want to play you.
Yeah, the coach is kind of looking at you and like, well, you're just not mature enough. Sorry. And you're like, what does that mean? What do I need to do next? I don't know where to go from here. And is it 100 miles or is it 1 mile? Like how far am I needing to grow?
So you're saying ministers, a church should set up.
I think that's where it's harder than Dexter is to be like, we want to go by stage, not age. All right. I get that in school where it's like, if you can't do 2 + 2 = 4, then like we know we got some work to do before we go to multiplication, division, and other stuff. That's a little easier. How do you do that and quantify that and set goals, for people that are spiritual in nature or church, suited for doing that within a church body where it doesn't offend anyone? It's not like, hey, I'm not trying to get down on you, but as soon as you start, hitting those 3-pointers, hey, I'll give you the green light to play and shoot 3-pointers in a game. I have a rule like that with my dudes. Sometimes I coach like little, like the 5th through 8th grade guys at our church league basketball. And those guys, that ball like weighs half as much as them. Like for them to shoot, like they're bringing it from the hip and like, ooh.
Full force.
And we have a rule. It's like if you can't hit 10 3-pointers in a row, which is hard, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, I'll give you the green light all day long. If you hit 10 in a row in practice, not contested, no one's like in your face, then I'll give you the green light. And I haven't had one kid do that, I don't think, yet. You see what I'm saying? So it means like, hey, you're just not there yet. And for them, it's because their body really isn't there yet.
Right.
They can't shoot like a normal way because that ball's so heavy. They're like jacking it like from the hip. That's not really what they need to be doing. They need to focus on something else, right? Yeah. That's not where their body's at.
Yeah.
And so how do you do that without hurting someone's feelings? It's just like, okay, it's externalized at that point. It's not, I'm mad at Nate because he said I can't go on this trip. It's, I didn't make those 3-pointers in practice, and that's where I need to focus instead of getting angry with someone or frustrated with someone. Now, if you set those goals so high, it's just like unreasonable. I can understand how people could that could turn bad. But I think if you set fair goals, and some of that may be, hey, if you're not willing to write this why you want to go on this mission trip paper, then maybe you shouldn't go on the mission trip. Or if you're not willing to read this book before you go and be a part of a study, like a weekly get together to talk through it before we go, maybe you shouldn't go. Maybe it's not really, that way it puts things on a more fair ground than just like, I don't think you're mature enough. You're like, well, what does that mean? So I think we have to do a lot to make sure we're setting like some fair goals out in front of people and saying, these are the expectations we have.
Yeah. And I think like, as far as hurting other people's feelings, I think that part of that is just a culture that we have, I guess, created in our American churches that like, whoa, don't say that about like, I believe in Jesus, like chill out. Don't be like super real with me. And you think about like the Paul's letters, and he is often just straight up like, you guys are terrible. You embarrass me. I'm disappointed in you. And then he says that over and over again to even sometimes to people he hasn't probably even met yet. You know what I mean? And he says things like, you just want milk. Like, I can't give you solid food yet. Like, you are babies. You are literally babies. And I'm feeding you milk instead of solid food. And multiple times Jesus says things like, if you can't understand this, how are you going to understand what's to come? To his disciples and to others following him. And so in some ways, like, I don't want to like intentionally hurt someone's feelings, obviously. Like, I don't want to shame someone into loving Jesus more. Like, that's not what I'm trying to do. But I do think it's fair to say, like, these are some expectations you need to meet. And because we want to take this really seriously and we want you to grow. And we're going to take it seriously. And so we hope you do too. And so one thought I had as you're talking is Long Hollow Baptist There's a guy, the preacher there, his name's Robbie Gallaty. Gallaty? I don't remember his name. Started a bunch of, or not started, he wrote a bunch of materials on discipleship and disciple making and discipleship groups and things like that. And a lot of it is what we track with as a church and what a lot of people are tracking with right now, as far as discipleship goes. And one of the things that it's in the book Growing Up, which is like the kind of like the easy to read guide to starting discipleship groups, is at the end there's a covenant they have to sign. So, I was thinking about that as you're saying, like, at least tell me, write this like in 500 words, tell me why you want to go on this trip. And I'm actually going to read it. I'm not just, the exercise is not just write it. Like, I'm going to read it. And if it's dumb, then like, we're going to have a conversation about it.
There's a girl that's going that I really like. And
yeah. And like, I think that we could date after this is over.
And I've always dreamed of having a, like, we met on a mission trip story to tell our grandkids. You're like, maybe not.
Maybe next time, bud.
Maybe next time.
Yeah, so like this discipleship making covenant, I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but it's just got like 6 points, and it's essentially like, I pledge myself to take this seriously. Like I'm entering a time of accelerated spiritual transformation. Like, I'm committed to that. I'm committed to meeting every week for an hour and a half. So you sign this, and so your mentor signs it too. And if you don't adhere to this, they can refer to it and say like, hey, like, if they want to give you multiple strikes, they can, but just say like, hey, look, you committed to taking this really seriously. And if you're not going to, so to draw that back to Dexter, that's just one thought I've had in between the messed up conversation and this one, that I'm starting to see more connections where I think it could be really good to start to set up some clear, not to make our faith works based. Like, that's not the goal. And I don't want to make that happen. I know that in this, all of this that we're saying is really easy, probably would be really easy to do. But it's to say instead, like, we're all trying to move together closer to God, into deeper relationship with Jesus, into deeper relationship with each other. We're trying to figure out what, as a church, we need to be doing in the world, trying to figure out how best we can treat creation, how best we can harness the potential that God has given us, rule and reign, all of that. We're moving towards new humanity, bringing the kingdom. We're all doing that at the same time, but in the same way that if you can't do 2 + 2 = 4, we're not going to ask you to do trig. Or if you can't, if whatever the line is, say like, if you don't understand this, we're not going to ask you to be on the dead annihilation team. Or like, if you're not doing, you know what I'm saying? And it's just a random thought, right. But just like, if this is the stage you're at, it's not bad. That's not bad that you're at that stage. Just commit to grow.
Right.
Because we really, really, really have some exciting things in store. But as we have, and this kind of transitions into the minister side, what we offer as a church, there is no like, we have this really, really exciting thing for you. It's like, no, learn so that you can then teach. And yep, that's about it. So once you figure it out, then you'll just teach a Sunday morning Bible class for the little kids, and maybe work in the nursery. You could serve communion. You could even give the communion talk. Maybe Russ will let you fill in for preaching. Anthony will let you lead a song, maybe quote some scripture in service. But then like past that, it's like, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's what we got. So, and I think, if we were splitting up the ministerial role into a bunch of different pieces, then you have a bunch of ministers that in theory are creating the things that people get to grow into eventually. Yeah. So you move through the discipleship pathway, you're up at a certain point, you're making disciples, and then your disciples are making disciples, and you're like, man, I just gotta, like, what can I do next? What else can I do? And you've got a bunch of ministers that are like, come over here, like, on a Sunday morning, they got booths in the lobby, and they're like, hey, we got this, like, serve whatever. We travel across the U.S. serving at natural disasters. Okay, we got this, like, we're doing all of this. We're building affordable housing that's like built in a better way here. Like, and you know what I'm saying? So, it all kind of starts to play together, but there is nothing to grow to as it currently stands,
Right.
in my opinion, which is a really harsh way of looking at it. But I'm being critical of my tradition. I'm being critical of the church that I love, that I'll never leave, that like I am who I am because of this.
Right.
These churches.
So that's kind of, getting on the stage in that age, conversation of how do we set goals for people to grow them forward. So let's go back to, splitting the teacher role apart and what parts of ministry could potentially be broken apart. I think anything can be broken apart. That's not the problem. Can it be off campus broken apart? Can you?
Because we kind of already do some of that.
Yeah. I mean, not everything is done by one person at a church. So we are already breaking roles apart. I don't think that's the crazy part.
Well,
I think for us,
can we give an example just so we're on the same page?
Like, for instance,
administrative assistants.
Yeah. So there's people that run the books. There's people that, are cutting checks for people. There's people that are answering the phone every day. There's people that are, doing funerals and weddings and visiting the hospital and all that stuff. So there's people making videos and recording announcements and getting the music ready. Yeah. So all that's broken apart. And it's some churches it's not. It may actually still be one person.
Right.
So maybe there's some magic for someone in the thought of, how can I break these roles apart a little bit? But the thing that really is interesting to me to talk about is when it comes to the preaching evangelism piece, I think especially for that lead pastor that's the face of kind of, the upfront, most time on stage face that's in front of the congregation, which typically means that we're listening to them the most. We're like, okay, what do you want to do? And if they're not someone that's leading the charge, there could actually be 15 people leading the charge in the congregation. But if they're not upfront on stage people, it
can
probably will fizzle. That's a little heavy-handed, but odds are if that person up in the pulpit is leading that charge, it's going to be more successful or
at least is on board with the vision of whatever is happening.
Right, exactly. And at least echoing some of those things. So what if, a preacher's putting in 20, 30 hours a week on just the sermon, no pastoral care, going to the hospital, all that stuff, not that, just the sermon. That is one thing that technology could allow us to do when it comes to, can we find a preacher out there in America and pipe them in that we agree with, that's great at what they do when it comes to, the parable of the minas and the talents. Like, there's a guy that doubled to 2, a guy that took it from 1 to 5, and a guy that takes it from 1 to 10. Like, let's get the 10 talent
communicator
in here and let him bring it. But I don't think you can ever replace the local pastor in the sense of the person who, like a teacher that comes beside you and asks, okay, did you understand that? Are you getting it? How did the homework go? All that kind of stuff.
But does that person need to be the same person that is communicating as
the gospel
in the preaching role?
Yeah,
the one that's in the context with the people.
Right. I don't think so personally. I think because a lot of us are doing that anyways, and it's causing some people to be like, well, I listen to Francis Chan's podcast, so I don't really go to church anymore. You're like, oh, okay. So some people are peeling off just to read that book or to, of that prominent preacher, teacher, writer in our Christian culture. But what they're lacking is the community. You can't replace the community experience of people gathered in one place in the name of Christ. You can't replace that with a book. You can't take communion truly and commune if you're not, community in unity around the table of Christ.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that, like, if you're in a jail somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and you're out there by yourself, and you can't meet with other Christians, that Christ isn't with you always. But I'm just saying that it is so important that the body of Christ gets together.
Yeah.
And meets together. And if, I don't know, God made us as physical beings, so our physical location and the physical space that we're in makes a difference, whether we like it or not. I know we would all like to be in two places at once, but we can't.
Totally.
If he thought we could handle that, he would have probably allowed it, but he didn't. So I'm taking that as a cue. I'm only here where I'm at right now for a reason, and where you place yourself physically is important. So I think.
So what is that? But then you're saying that, but then you're saying, but we'll get the guy who's in a different location.
I think that the message can come from afar. I think that the Bible came from thousands of miles away as far as who the writers were. The spread is 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 year spread on time. The physical location of them on planet Earth was different from where I'm at. So I think we're not being untrue to Scripture to be like, okay, Paul's writing from prison to people, like you said, he may have never met before. Yeah, so let's talk about the biblical precedent for, is there a way that we can keep, because let's also talk about the practical reality of a congregation. The first thing that they're going to hire, if they can hire anybody, is the preacher.
You're talking about like a new church.
Yeah, it's just a new startup church. They bring on the first person. It's not going to necessarily be a church gardener. It's not going to be a landscaper. It's gonna be somebody that's preaching up front.
And they're probably the one that started the church.
Probably the one
at least in American Christianity.
Right. Maybe it was the worship leader that started the church.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Maybe. But yeah, typically that's the first hire. The second hire in our tradition would be the song leader, worship leader. Then from there, youth ministry, children's ministry, secretary.
Maybe an executive minister.
Someone in the business side of like running the books and getting all that going. And then it splits out into, homeless ministries, street ministries, evangelistic stuff, involvement ministers, to make sure that everyone's getting connected.
Yeah.
So that goes from there. But I think across the board, the evangelist preacher is going to be the first hire. And so it's kind of weird to think that we could skip that part. And what that makes me think about a little bit is like, okay, I lived in Honduras for a little while, and a lot of the country never got wired for telephone, right? So they didn't have the money to string up a bunch of telephone wires everywhere and everyone have a phone in their house. So then when cell phone technology came around, actually a lot of them have phones now, but they totally skipped that whole, evolution of wired to wireless and then, on from there. And so they just totally leapfrogged that. And it's just the same thing with Starlink. Elon Musk is putting all these satellites up into space that are going to give high speed broadband internet, via satellite to anyone on planet Earth. And so this could be like, on another continent that never had phones, internet, any kind of connectivity. And all of a sudden they go straight to, I could play Fortnite on in the middle of the jungle somewhere as long as I have electricity and a TV, and you're just like, what? So they're skipping over that part, which is very strange to think, like, if we're not investing in those like earlier technologies that led up to that, can you just kind of break out and move faster than everyone else? Because you don't have the sunk cost fallacy of, but we had some people keep their landline around and still pay $10 a month for it and never use it because it's got a cell phone. Like, why would you do that? And even my parents have their landline and literally they never answer it because it's like 99%, it's just going to be a telemarketer.
Yep.
No one that actually knows them calls them on their landline. So you see what I'm saying? We can all get stuck in this, like, well, we used to always start here and then go to the next place. Preacher was always the first hire. So what if you were doing a startup and you're like, Francis Chan is going to be our preacher, or whoever, John MacArthur or somebody, is going to be our, Andy Stanley, whoever. And then and typically that's the most paid person at a church, and we take that budget and we put it into people that are going to come alongside you and say, what did that stir up inside of you? What did you think about what he had to say? Do we even agree with that? I don't agree with that. I hear what he's saying, but actually this is my thought. And it's more of so this is where we got into the temple, the synagogue, and the home level stuff.
Can I ask you a question first?
Yeah.
So typically what you're saying is typically when a church starts, you're hiring a preacher, which is true, I think. If there is a different place, let us know that did it differently.
I've never seen it go any other way.
I would love to know of a different strategy. But so they hire the preacher. What we're saying is, instead, just skip that step. But you're not actually going to be able to skip that step because you're still hiring somebody. Because what we're saying is, like, right now, the preacher does a lot of things. Each minister at a church does a lot of things. And so if you're going to split that role up, it doesn't mean you don't hire you're not hiring the preacher, you're hiring a bunch of pastoral care peeps. So you're saying, like, instead of, at a mid-level church in America, it wouldn't be outlandish for a preacher to be making $90,000 to $100,000.
Yep.
So you're saying we're going to take that money and we're going to split that and say, we're going to pay, whatever you want to do, 2 people 45, or we're going to pay 3 people 30,
whatever. Yeah.
And they're all going to be on equal footing. No one's in charge of each other. It's just like they are all the pastoral care ministers. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying, because typically that one person, because so many roles are rolled up into one with that, there's a lot put into that person, so they're paid, more than most people on the staff. But I will say this, I like to preach. It stresses me out. I usually lose about 3 nights of sleep before I preach. But, I get good feedback from it, from the church, encourages me in it,
Yeah.
But I don't obsess about, I'm a Bible nerd I'm a curious human being. I'm a Bible nerd to a point.
Out where you want to.
Right. But it's like, it's in gardening, it's with technology, it's with the Word of God. It's like, yes, I wish I knew Hebrew and Greek, but no, I don't. I don't know it. And I probably never will. But, I really, really love being around people that are like the super nerds. I'm like a layer below, jack of all trades. I'm like 80% okay at most things. Never the best. Never the best. And that's okay,
everybody.
because I'm like a 50 to 75% guy. I'm serious. With my music, with my ministry, with my gardening, like I know a little bit about a lot of things, but I never can obsess about one thing long enough and push everything aside to make that just superstar level.
Yeah.
And it was with basketball and baseball and video games. It's with everything. It's like, I'm just good enough to hang in there and not look totally stupid.
Yeah.
But I'm not. My real thing is tying all the pieces together, because I know just enough to ask an expert questions to really tease out what we need to move together to accomplish something, bigger that requires, these 3 things all colliding.
Yeah.
So the point is, if you had the preaching thing under control, and you could have more pastoral care people that are coming alongside, that are creating, like you said, the stage, not age kind of curriculum and goals for people to, move and be discipled and move through a program. Making sure that people don't fall through the cracks relationally, because you can have a great preacher and that may keep someone at a church for a while. But if they feel like a ghost, if they could come and go and no one would know the difference, or if their husband or wife died that week and no one, and you see them at the door like, hey, how's it going, sister so-and-so? How are you doing? Fine. I'm doing fine. How are you? It's like, we can be an immense hurt, and without pastoring spirits in the building, we may never know what people are really going through. And then
taking the preaching role off of that person, you're saying, like, I think of Russ Corley
Right.
at Madison, take the preaching role. He's very, very good at the pastoral care thing as it stands.
I'm pretty sure he has breakfast and lunch with like 28, 7 days a week, 2 meals, however many. No, that's 14. Sorry. No, yes, I don't know what the math is. The point is that guy is doing like interpersonal stuff all
the
day,
time.
every day. My dad got
in
the
between.
My dad doesn't even go to Madison. He was in the hospital with some heart issues, and I think he was only there for like 24 hours. And Russ had already like visited him like 3 times before I had like checked in with him about like how he was doing. And he was like,
Incredible.
"Yeah, Russ was here," and then he came back, and then he came back, and if I hadn't heard from you, and he started making me look bad. I was like,
"Yeah, come on, Russ." But yeah, so you take off the 20 to 30 hours that he spends writing sermons and say like, go spend that being a pastor.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that finding that person for the congregation wouldn't be something you put a lot of time and effort into, and I'm not also saying that there may be some Sundays where you need to get up and pastor your church because of something very specific that's going on with your congregation. This is not a total autopilot thing.
Sure.
It's for me though, I love hearing someone else preach and then getting with my kids and being like, what did you hear? What did you take away from that?
Yeah.
I love having that conversation afterwards. That's where my heart really, really is. I also have a big mouth and I also like to get up and talk. But then I don't always get to have that follow-up conversation or as honest of a follow-up conversation, because if someone didn't like what I said, if someone, disagreed, whatever it may be, we couldn't critique it as much and really get into the nitty-gritty of it.
Yeah. So what I think of is, I think with that model, assuming that it would put a lot on whatever your church calls, whoever's listening, whatever your church calls small groups, life groups, tribes, whatever they call them. It puts a lot. Oh yeah, it puts a lot on the ministers, those pastoral ministers, and it puts a lot on the conversations we end up having when we meet together as a life group later that day. I think so. For me, I think I would be down to have, like be piping in Christine Kane every morning or, whoever. But a requirement that I would have to make it function would be that everyone has to be in a life group and they have to meet. They have to. And they have to do it once a week. No once a month, no every other week crap. We need to like meet every single week, because the conversation then becomes even better. Not that the preacher that you currently have on staff can initiate that conversation, but you get 3 tiers of filtering. So you get to hear the sermon from whoever, from Francis Chan. You hear it, you're thinking about it. At church for Bible classes, you've got these pastoral ministers who are like, what'd you hear? What'd you think of the sermon today? What did you think about that? How do you feel about that? How does that drive with you? Do you disagree with anything? And so you get some initial level, like, let's toss it around a little bit. And then later that day, you're with, like, this is your group. This is your closest group. This is the people you're closest to at church. And in that group, you get to say, like, man, I am extremely convicted.
Mm-hmm. So that sets up the temple, synagogue, and home level stuff. So let me explain that real quick, because this is how I kind of framework, church experiences. Daniel basically just ran you through it, but without saying the words. So
yeah, I was
temple,
leaving that to you.
Yeah. So in Acts 2, especially, we see these people that had hugged Jesus, been with Jesus, loved Jesus, and were trying to take that on the road and take it out to the world. What did their life look like? What were they doing with their time and with the resources and all that kind of stuff? So it says that they're still meeting at the temple courts every day. So these were Jerusalem Jewish people. They're in town with the temple, and they're meeting there every day. So this was a gathering of thousands, okay,
Yeah.
in Solomon's promenade or whatever it's called, his porch. And so they have this huge gathering, okay? Perk is, you're not alone. You're part of something big and
powerful,
important, and it's powerful. The downside is if you don't show up, you may not be noticed, right?
Right.
You can come in and out. Okay, synagogue level is not everyone could go to the temple every day. So a synagogue was where you had an older authority figure, teacher type, classroom with the teacher type situation where I think they were built. We have some of them that archaeological, digs that I think they could seat up to like maybe 40 people. And there's one person that's an obvious.
More like it's in your neighborhood.
Right. So this is more of your church building type situation where, it's a smaller gathering. It's a two-way conversation, but there's definitely an authority figure in the room that's answering those questions. And if someone says something nutty or not biblical or whatever, they would typically be corrected and be like, well, that's okay. But just
someone
remember
still
this.
kind of has the last word. Someone's the expert.
Exactly. Yeah. There's still an expert in the room that's kind of, the last word, the teacher, if you will. Then you come down to, and then they're meeting in homes and they're eating together. And this is not, there's a teacher in the room. This is the students sitting around after hours going, I had never heard of that. Like, what'd you think about that?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, dude, that blew my mind.
Or even saying,
that was like, me in the dorm with my Bible major, buddies talking about that, that ethics class we had today and trying to figure out like, what does that mean for us?
Yeah.
And there's no up and down. It's all probably peer level stuff. Everyone's speaking freely, two-way street.
And this is also a lot of where you're getting to spell out, like synthesizing life and what you're hearing from the teachers. Like you're getting to put that together and say like, man, my week was crazy. But what, Jim Bob said about this, like it really made me think. And I hadn't ever thought about it like that before. And it's because I had a crazy week. And then you get to have a lot of those conversations.
Right. I think that Christians that are only experiencing the temple are, they're missing out because they're having this big like, woo, I am jazzed up, but they have no one to really talk about the implications as an expert or authority or someone as a mentor in the synagogue kind of situation. Mm-hmm. They have no friends or community to kind of, parse that out with and say, hey, I think we should be doing more service for the homeless or whatever. Like, how can the four of us get together and do this thing?
Yeah.
And then you got some people that do 2 out of 3 where it's like, yeah, I go to the temple level stuff, big church, then I go to a Sunday school class, but I still kind of do it under the radar of just like, we can discuss an idea all day long in a class. You can, learn something in a business class, but honestly, running a lemonade stand is still like, that's where you really actually learn. And I think a lot of us some of us go to the synagogue level classroom type thing, and we just kind of like blast off about these thoughts we have and never really put them into practice. And then the home level, hopefully, what happens to a lot of people that do that third one, I think people that experience all 3 of those, it can be a really, really rich experience. Unfortunately, as you get down into the home level, a lot of people that participate in that will peel off and not really engage the information because it's awkward. It's getting too close to home, too personal, and it's like sports, weather, and then we have to do this like 10 questionnaire from the preacher, from the temple sermon, and we just kind of work through it. It's super awkward. We don't really talk, and then we get right back to like the buffalo wings and whatever we're watching a football game at. We're just kind of like, let's get through this because this is getting way too close to home and too. Yeah. I appreciate people that still try, but I've seen that a lot too, where it's like, hey, you're not just experiencing the temple, you're not just experiencing synagogue, you're getting down to even that home level where like, hey, if you're not there, like it's noticed. But then people kind of bail as far as really letting that vulnerable, intimate conversation happen of like, what am I supposed to do with this Jesus thing?
So with that in mind, how does that make you? How do you feel about that whole deal, the temple, synagogue, homes conversation? How do you feel like that is changed or benefits from the piping Francis Chan in on Sunday mornings,
Right. Okay.
or not just piping Francis Chan in, but having ministers doing different things in the church?
I think that there's biblical precedent for doing it that way because, when it comes to the temple level experience, um, not everyone could get, that's the thing, they didn't have technology back then. So Paul's writing letters, that teaching is coming from Jerusalem out into the world. It's going via, spoken word and written word. We have a different way of doing that to where we can actually see people, communicating that gospel. But I think, having what we talked about was like, what is a little a apostle versus a big A apostle? An apostle is an evangelist on one hand and a teacher on one hand, but it's also someone that is like, oh no, I hit my mic and I hope that didn't mess up the recording again. But I got excited. Okay, so there was the capital A apostles that we know about as these were the 12 that Jesus picked, walked with him, did miracles. All this, they wrote books of the Bible, plus Paul. So there's 13 with Matthias and then Paul. Okay, so there's these apostles. Those are big A apostles in my mind. Little A apostles, though, do those still exist? Because those are still on some of the like spiritual gifts. I don't know if it's spiritual gift list, but it's on a list of like there's evangelists, preachers, teachers, apostles, prophets. I forget what if you can help me there, but
working on it.
That's a little A apostle, and it's like, what is a little A apostle? This is just something that we need to contemplate. What is the difference between an evangelist and a little A apostle? And in my brain, I'm thinking, okay, what did apostles do? They were like bigger than one congregation. Does that make sense? Like they were the connective tissue for the church. There's someone that was respected, an authority figure, could travel from church to church as an encouragement, as a teacher, but at the same time wasn't getting down into the nitty gritty of what maybe the deacons did, taking those in Jerusalem, or taking care of the very practical needs of people. It was their job. And see, that's another biblical precedent where we see even in, I think, Acts chapter A, B, C, D, E, F. So Acts chapter 6, the first deacons. That's basically what happens, is that these widows aren't being taken care of. And we definitely have a precedent of the apostles were not going to stop preaching, teaching, getting the word out to take food around to people. And that may seem like I'm too good for that. But they did appoint people to make sure it happened, and that's their leadership. That's their, disseminating your roles to other people. I think that's important and good, and an apostle type may do that across multiple congregations, and that's where, I can see Francis Chan in that sense. If he's your preacher and he's the one that's teaching and has a global view and sense of the church, I think in that way he is acting kind of like a little A apostle for the church, because God has anointed him as an incredible speaker and teacher. Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, a lot of churches that he never contacted, that he never tried to get into, he never asked permission, used his words to demonstrate the gospel to their community of faith.
Yeah.
And that means he's doing something. He's that 10 talent servant, that's just like, he's prolific and profound and just helps people.
And the gospel is the word of God. The gospel is a thing that isn't tied to a certain context at a certain time. What was written that we have to read was, for sure, but part of the amazing thing we get to affirm about Scripture is that we can still learn from it today. So what Francis ends up communicating, or any preacher, we use him quickly, but whoever the preacher is, whoever the teacher is, whatever they're communicating is timeless truths. It's things that he doesn't have to know what Charlotte, North Carolina is like in August of 2020 to be able to bring it, to say, like, this is something that God wants you to hear for knowing how to live in this world, how to rule and reign, how to treat other people, how to
But I think that a local pastor does need to take that down to the level of synagogue and home of like, okay, what does that mean for us? How do we live this thing out? And I think it is great to have someone who's got a global, like we go to a conference called Passion Conference in Atlanta every year with their college students. And one thing they've been raising money for the last couple years is, like, it's a possibility that if we raise enough money, we could translate the Bible into every known language on planet Earth in the next like 20 years.
It's crazy.
And you're like, that's not something we talk about in my church very often, because we're just down in the weeds of our own thing. But you need that temple experience sometime to be like, whoa, we could do that.
God is doing crazy things in the world.
And the thing is, if you watch, there's an Elephant Room episode. If you don't know what the Elephant Room is, this is kind of what spurred some of this conversation. Yeah. It's major pastors, Mark Driscoll, David Platt, who's Matt Chandler, some others that are doing multi-site, and they're doing where they're streamed around, and they're doing 8 services a day and all this kind of stuff, and they're kind of parsing all this out. It's we'll put the link down in the notes, the show notes, but one thing that they were talking about is just the Southern Baptist Convention alone. This is not in the episode we're going to link to. This is another episode. But just in the Southern Baptist Convention alone, if you took the money that had been given, and the money needed to translate the Bible into every known language on earth, that money has been given multiple times, like 10 times over. Yeah. But it never quite gets there because people lose focus. People lose, we don't keep that like global sense of church in front of us. And I think we need voices like that in our life to help us. Here's another thing. I think when you don't have outside teacher, preacher people in your life,
you may start to think weird
feedback loops, and you can actually get down on yourself because you can see the things that aren't going well, but it's so hard to see the things that are going well because, I was talking to someone the other day about my church where it was just like, there's something they had a critique about or sad about or down about. I'm like, I'll be honest, y'all. Like, our church has a gym, like a full-blown gym. Yeah. Or we have like a commercial kitchen down in our basement where we could do all kinds of like huge cooking and helping people through that. We have all these resources here. And if someone from another church came here, like we were walking around the building with the family that had to punt and use our building for a wedding coming up because the other church building canceled on them. And they're walking around, they're like, wow, this is awesome, man. This is so cool. I have actually talked about using our church building as a wedding venue, but everyone on staff was kind of like, it's not that great. And we could probably, no one would really want to. And we don't have some big field out back where all the groomsmen and the bridesmaids can skip through the field with the sun setting in the background. And, we're too urban for all that. Yeah. And you're just like, okay, yeah, maybe not. Then this family comes in, they're like, dude, this is awesome. Like, this is great. I'm like, hey, can everyone listen can you say that louder for the people in the back? Thanks. And I think that perspective of having that cross-pollination may be really, really nice to helping us get our eyes above like our own squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So anyways, I'd encourage you guys to listen to that Elephant Room. I think it's first round, 5th conversation or something like that. 5th session, I think.
It written down over here somewhere.
So we're going to put that in the link.
Yeah, I can remember.
Below. But anyways, what do you guys think about what if we allowed... Now, the bad downside of this is if everyone took this path, you could very much, like in all of America, there could be like 15 preachers in all of America, which I don't know if that's good. But if you were doing the synagogue and the home level stuff, I think it could be good in the sense that you don't have to agree with everything you read or everything you hear. Oh. You get to take that and bring it into your local context.
And honestly, it might be better to hear to hear someone that will really will really challenge you sometimes.
Because he doesn't care if I'm streaming him in from California and I get all worked up and angry about something he says or she says, they'll never know about that. They can speak freely, and they're going to have their local context that they got to worry about. But still, it's just like, I think they can maybe speak more freely and maybe push a little more buttons and push us into discomfort zones that cause us to grow than maybe our local pastor can in some ways, because, he needs to, feed his family, support his family. So, but I do think that there are some things you just can't replace. You can't replace the aspect of the one who comes along beside you,
totally,
the one that visits you in the hospital, the one that. So for me, I think this really only applies in a major way to not to being able to do it from an external source, not at your local congregation, is just the communication of the gospel, the preaching. I see that being something that can be outsourced. But everything else, even though it can be split into different roles between different people, I don't think you can replace the physical human being in the building in any of the other parts of what it is to be a pastor.
Yeah.
I think you can take the preaching and the evangelism, the apostleness, but the rest, I think, needs to come from a human being in the building with his flock, with his sheep. And I even though those roles can be broken apart, I don't think they can be replaced by outsource.
I think
you feel the same way.
I do. Again, with the life group writer, or small group, whatever you want to call it, house church.
Don't start. You'll never stop.
I'll never stop. Tribe, pack, herd.
Zone groups.
What'd you say?
Zone groups.
Zone groups. What is that?
Yeah, man. It's just like our church got so big at one point where we had to start breaking people, like we're in the thousands, 5,000, where it's like, if you're in this neighborhood, your zone is this. You get together with, people from there for your house church stuff. And we had zones all around Nashville so that we could take care of each other a little bit better and not be scatterbrained.
So I think that if we can make sure that is happening and that people aren't just coming in to be consumers, I think this idea has potential to make people more, I don't know if engaged is the right word, but less consumeristic. Which at first glance you'd think like, oh, we're getting Matt Chandler, like I'm going to that church. You'd think that maybe people would be like more consumeristic about it, but I actually think because it's someone elsewhere, we still have to have the conversation about it. We can't just all watch. If you're in your room by yourself, you could watch it and then never think about it again. But if 500 people are in a room watching the same sermon, like we can't not talk about it. We got to talk about it.
I also think that playing old sermons isn't the best situation because of pop culture references, news events. I think it should be like you're live streaming that person, even if it's from across the country.
Yeah, we stay current with them.
Into your town. I don't know if it's as good to just bring up old sermons. Now, there may be an old sermon or two that's just as timeless as can be. It's worth it. But when I'm imagining this, I'm imagining it having a partnership with another church that streams the sermon over to you, and you kind of work with them to form your service around, that piece, and you have singing before, whatever after, and you just have a knowledge of when that's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And so it's not just like, pull something off from YouTube and throw it up there.
Yeah. And then it would be good if there was enough coordination with whatever church it is to maybe even get like, hey, Christine Kane, like, when do you finish writing your sermons every week? And she says like, I usually am done about Friday. I'm making little changes on Saturday, but majorly I'm done by Friday. Be like, hey, Friday night, could you send us just like a really vague outline of what you're going to talk about? Maybe just the verses, the topic, like just give us an idea. and then the pastoral care ministers can be, ahead, and creating a connection where it's not just like, well, we have no idea what she's about to say this week, here we go, but it's just like we're prepared to hear a message, and prepared to take the questions and have the conversation, and we've got questions already prepared, and
right,
being able to.
I think another thing too, when it comes to media equipment, if you didn't have, like, you have the preacher on the camera, and then he's got a verse, and you have to have this thing called a switcher, which are like tens of dollars to do multiple channels of what's going up on the screen, and multiple feeds they're going up on the screen. I think you can get away with a lot of tech equipment that's really expensive and is constantly needing to be updated if the live stream you're receiving is doing that all on their end.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like Christine Kane's got a point or a video or something that she wants to put up on the screen.
You're just
that's all happening on their
already
end.
edited version.
It's coming through just like they're seeing it at their church. It's coming through to you. You don't have to have a fancy switcher and all these other mechanisms to do that.
One computer and good Wi-Fi.
The great example we've used in the past, and I think it's a good one, is it's the difference between your local theater troupe, your high school, musical, and Hollywood. It's like, is it better to get the best talent in the world and to do it with incredible CGI and all this technology and then be able to repeat that in other places than to give the script to the Avengers to every local high school theater troupe?
And that's
how we communicate this really big idea in every town across the world. And I think all of us would laugh at, just imagine what Captain America and Iron Man would look like if they're made out of cardboard in a local theater. They couldn't fly around. And they're like, at best, wired up and floating around, dummy and running into the wall. So that's what I'm kind of like. The gospel is so important. It's so big. I feel like we do need to give it, just not take it Hollywood in the sense of it's all smoke and mirrors and it's not real. I'm saying, but take it to the level of, let's put it in some of the best arenas there are, best orators there are, best speakers there are, and let them speak it and bring it to us with the visual tools and other ways to communicate those things to us as these local people that they're going to end up using cardboard and and wires, where they have all of these resources available to them that make the experience so much more rich. And
then it lets the person that is your preacher be to do more teaching and more pastoring,
and ask more questions like, so what does that mean for us?
To ask a lot more of your congregation, probably.
Right. I love having those follow-up conversations. Like, what did you think about that? It made me think about this, So I would jive with that big time, because I get real rigid and stressed out when I've got to be the person just trying to change someone's heart with my words and just hit them hard and hope it impacts and changes and moves them. That's a heavy burden to bear, especially for a guy like me that's got his head in 1,000 different places all day, every day. So, we
would love to hear what you guys think about that.
Absolutely.
Or if you have more ideas, you're like, oh, they didn't even talk about, like, if you did that, you could do this. We would love to hear it.
Because I actually think a lot of youth ministries do that, where they do bring in the speaker, the curriculum, and it's kind of a press play and discuss model. But we don't do it on a church level, which is interesting to me. Yeah. It's kind of like us
on a kids level.
Definitely do it on kids level, for sure. So it like works there. Some use it in, I don't, I probably should, because I'd be a lot more friendly human being if I wasn't so stressed out about teaching every week. And sometimes it's less stressful to just teach instead of having to try to find perfect curriculum. So, it's up to whoever, but we never take it to the level of big church. So I believe in little a apostles. I think they're a real thing. I know there's one person in my life who used to call themselves an apostle, and that creeped me out a bunch because like I was like,
Whoa,
I don't think that exists
chill, chill, chill,
anymore.
chill, chill.
And
Yeah.
I think you have to be able to like do miracles and stuff, and I don't think you can. I don't think that's what he was trying to say though when he was using that title for himself.
Yeah.
Because if you know this man, he traveled around to a lot of congregations, had lots of networks and relationships and authority in people's lives. Not that he strong-armed out of them, but he earned out of love and concern and discipleship.
Yeah.
And now I look back on that, I'm like, that didn't scare me as much. But before I first heard that, it's like the only time in my life I'd ever heard someone refer to themselves as an apostle. And I was like, yeah, try again.
I don't know if this guy listens to it, but that's how I look at Earl.
I think, yeah, for me, John Mark Hicks functions as an apostle in my mind, where he is speaking to not one congregation all the time, but a level above that, where it's more of a broad global view of things, and even how he uses his social media and stuff like that. It's always talking to the church, like the global
Capital
church,
C.
not who's standing in front of me.
Yeah, I think of Earl Lavender because he still has all these relationships with people in Italy. And there's all these churches that look to him for guidance and for wisdom, and that love him, and he loves them. And then he's got also a lot of churches in the States, in Tennessee and around that love him and call him and ask him for advice and for guidance, and that he would fill in for any of those people at any point in time to teach anything. He would do anything for them. Right. And that's kind of what I think of.
Yeah. So I would love to hear some feedback on this. Y'all can call us. Y'all can email us. You can, write something back to us. We'd love to hear your feedback on whether you think this is a good idea or not, and whether we should kind of save that budget for people that are really going to hit the ground and be in the congregation, be in the community, getting that work done where we can. That's one thing. I really don't know of a bunch of other things that we can pipe in from somewhere else.
Yeah, or if you thought of a different thing that you could outsource and say, like, what if we did this part differently?
Oh, here's one last thing. How do you feel about the worship being that way? Because I've seen some youth ministries that like they just don't have strong singers, they don't have strong instrumentalists, and so they take that epic Hillsong song, the music video, and they sing to it. Because they can't pull that off on a local level. I
think if you can't pull it off on a local level, I think there's nothing. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but I think there's something about. Especially for our tradition, still doing a cappella to some degree, that it's got to be like it's never the same unless the people in the room are engaged in worship together.
Right. Now, I do think that the people in the room could be engaged and even blasting it and bringing it. But I do think for some reason it's a little different than me than the preaching. I don't know why, but it's like
a concert. It becomes more concert-y, and like we're watching that person.
Right.
But maybe that says something about how we even do worship as it stands.
Right. Well, that's true too. And if anyone was like, would you rather watch a Coldplay DVD concert series, whatever, or would you rather be at the concert? Like, I think most people would love to be a part of that moment, that experience, knowing that like this happened this way one time.
We were there for it. Yeah.
Is important. But I don't fault anyone that just by necessity needs to go that route. But it does make you wonder. I think there are some people that are trying to tough it out, and it's so discouraging, and people are like, we're terrible, and we forget the words, and like it's just everyone's mumbling, and it's bad. It's like, knowing when that moment is where it's like, I think we should just like rock out with some Chris Tomlin.
Some Zoe group.
When is that moment? So
definitely
that's another thing where it's like, because that's really stressful too, lining up all your musicians, getting them to practice beforehand. But at another hand, it's also a great opportunity for, you know, young people to grow and learn
Totally.
and have opportunities to serve and lead. So that's something. So
Cool.
that was another one I wanted to talk to you about, where it's like, can you outsource the music? I don't know.
Can you? I don't think so.
I don't know. I mean, you could. The answer
I mean,
is technology
it is
says
possible.
yes.
Yes.
Whether we should do it or not.
All right. Well, that's it for today. Thank you guys for listening to this episode. Sorry for the delay on episodes again. We apologize. And we are really excited for some stuff that's coming up, some episodes that we're looking forward to doing, talking about what buildings say about what we believe, how we build things, what that says about who we follow, and we put our allegiance in. Some conversation about the image of God, maybe some potential interviews, some things like that. We're really excited. So, yeah, keep on listening. Thank you for your support thus far.
I have a prayer request before we go.
Yeah.
I actually stuck my mouth and actually pitched in episode 10 the baby bond I did to my eldership here at Madison, and I'm actually representing on that tomorrow night and trying to see, like, you know, do we hang on to all the points or just do one out of the 10 things, or, you know, like how much can we stomach?
Yeah.
So I would appreciate you guys praying about that, because I think it could be just a huge deal in our community to try to pursue justice in where we are in the world. Right so on. I would love your prayers on that, and I hope to update you with some good news on us deciding to roll forward with some of that. Yep. Cool. All right, y'all. Love you. Have a great week, and thanks for spending the day with us.
Talk to you later.
We'll see you soon.
Peace.